Thank you, everyone who's joining. We'll give people a few minutes to get logged in and settled, and we'll get started in just a minute or two. See a bunch of people joining right now. I just want to say welcome, and again, we'll take a minute or two, get settled in. I know we'll have some others logging in over the next couple of minutes, and we'll get started in just a minute or two. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna call this a tipping point in our logins. Hopefully, we'll have some others joining us as we get started over the next couple minutes. But welcome everyone to our community engagement forum. For those of you who are new to the forum, just a little sort of introduction to us, who we are, what we're doing here. This is a collaboration between the CCTSI Community Engagement and Health Equity Core and the education program at Accords. I'm going to try and point out some things in our rotating slides here. So first, CCTSI Community Engagement offers consultations. If that is something of interest to you, Kaylee Gordon is our main contact there. You can reach out to request a consult on your work. Other community engagement forums from the past, if there's a topic you're interested in, are available on the CCTSI Community Programs website. Some of the other things, CCTSI's community engagement pilot grants, you should expect to see RFAs for that program coming out in the next couple of weeks. So November 8th, just a couple weeks away. And these are great pilot funding for your community engaged work. Little bit about Accords. So we are a one-stop shop for pragmatic research. And one of the things that we offer are educational offerings like this forum, as well as seminars, workshops, and conferences. And Jordan, and then pointing out a couple of upcoming events. So we have seminars around ethics and challenges in shared decision-making. We're launching that series next week. We have a dissemination implementation workshop coming up November 9th and 16th. Our statistical methods and pragmatic research seminar series. Our next talk is on November 20th. And then you'll see two more in those shared decision-making and statistical methods series coming up in December. So mark your calendars if those are topics of interest to you. And I think, Jordan, we've made it through some of the announcements and upcoming events. Did I miss anything in our slides there? All right. Well, today, our Community Engagement Forum, we are focused on community representation. And for those of you who maybe are new or weren't able to attend in July, we spent some time talking about the CBPR principles, community-based participatory research, and hearing from many of you about what is most relevant to your work, what do you most want to explore around those principles, how they apply to the research you're trying to do with communities. And this topic really came from that. So we hope that you see some of the concerns and ideas and successes that you brought to us reflected in our discussion today about what is representation and how community voice and identity can be shared through advisory boards and partnerships. And today we have some special guests with us, Merit Felzine and Charlene Barrientos Ortiz. So I want to just give us a little bit of sort of foundation for our conversation today, reflecting back the CBPR principles that we are focused on today. So 3 of these really came through from the conversations that we had with many of you in July. And we wanted to focus today on the principles of respect and recognize the community as a unit of identity, to build on strengths and resources in the community, and to facilitate collaborative, equitable involvement of all partners in all phases of research. So those are big concepts, but we're going to try and tackle them all today. So I'll just walk through these. So the first, respect and recognize the community as a unit of identity. This can look different. This can be defined and sort of delineated differently based on the community that you're working with and how they see themselves. So some of the ways that this can often look might be geographic location. It might be a city or a county or a neighborhood or a state, right? So where people are located could define a community. It might be around race and ethnicity and a culture around those identities. Could be around nationality, so where people come from, their citizenship, or a country of origin. It may be around a disability or disability status. It may be around a sexual orientation or gender identity. So these things are things to think about and consider as you think about what communities you are a part of and what communities you are working with and how those communities define themselves and sort of put bounds and thoughts around their identities and how they connect to each other. Builds on strengths and resources in the community. So the idea here is that while we may be trying to solve problems, we are approaching those problems with the assets of the community and the people at the table. So I've pulled some pieces from the National Academies of Medicine recent report around meaningful community engagement. And I think these are just really important sort of grounding ideas about how to think about strengths and resources in community. So the idea being that research with community should have representations of community that are assets and resiliency based, that we are not always focused on problems, but we're looking at what people are bringing to the table, that we are improving cultural knowledge and practices among partners that are grounded in a broader cultural proficiency and respect for community difference. So we're really thinking about what are all those great things that people bring to the table? How can we use and leverage and build from that? And then we're looking for solutions that are recognized and endorsed by community members, that we're leveraging assets in the community and the partnerships that produce them. So again, just coming to the work with a lens that everyone has something to contribute and to grow from. And then lastly, this principle of facilitating collaborative and equitable involvement of all partners in all phases. So some of the things that you may need to think about if you are aiming for collaborative and equitable partnership are the contributions that people are bringing and the opportunities for contribution. The power dynamics in your partnership, who maybe has power that they're bringing to the table, and how can you think about spreading that power around and creating structures that allow everyone to have power and voice in processes and decision-making. Who controls the money? Where does that money sit? Who has to approve expenditures? Who gets money out of the process? And so having an awareness of how those things impact the work that you're doing. How can you think about creating equitable processes around money? Who's compensated and how are they compensated? How much are they compensated for what kind of work? And how do we value sort of more formal things like degrees with lived experience and expertise from community members? And how do we think about putting those on a level playing field that both are equally important, and how can we adjust our compensation accordingly? And then how can we facilitate equal learning and equal trust across our partnerships? So things to keep in mind when you're trying to really embody this principle. And then just some best practices for how you might go about actually living these principles in your partnerships. So some best practices for going about this is to really be engaging in self-reflection, both as an individual member of one of these partnerships, but also to do this with your teams, to come to the group knowing your intentions and being able to talk about those with each other, to articulate the goals for your partnership as an individual. What do I need out of a partnership, and what do we all need out of a partnership? So thinking about those things together, focusing on relationships, that the way we have success in these partnerships is by building individual relationships, spending time with each other as human beings, not just as transactional partners. Thinking long-term and visioning our partnership and the impact on a longer time scale than maybe a 1 or 2 year grant might typically allow or set us up for. And then to think about flexibility and being flexible, that our paths will change, and because we're in partnership, hopefully our paths will change for the better. I just want to point to that National Academies of Medicine report. I think this is a really great resource for people who are working in community engagement space. And I want to acknowledge one of our guests today, Merit Felzine, helped to participate in the creation of this resource. And most importantly, I'm going to hand the reins over now. I want to introduce our moderator today, Adrian Miller. He's Executive Director of the Colorado Council of Churches, and he's also a member of our Community Engagement Forum Planning Committee. So Adrian, I'm going to let you take the reins. Thank you so much for leading our discussion today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, our panelists. So Merit Felzine is a longtime engaged community member and community advisor in various capacities. Most specifically, she served on the advisory council for the High Plains Research Network, from which she will share many of her comments today. She resides outside of Sterling in northeastern Colorado, where she helps run her family's farm. Charlene Barrientos Ortiz is a community engagement coordinator with almost 30 years of experience. She currently works in the Colorado School of Public Health on community engaged projects related to sexual health and substance abuse prevention, and as a community research liaison with the Colorado Clinical Translational Sciences Institute. So, Merit, we're going to give you the floor first, the virtual floor.
Thanks, Adrian. So let me just tell you a little bit about my path to this work. 20 years ago, I received a call, an invitation, shall you say, that was pretty broad, that said, I'm thinking of this crazy idea. I think I'd like to have community voices involved in the work that's happening in Eastern Colorado. And at the time, it was Northeastern Colorado. I don't know what this advisory council might look like. I don't even know what it's going to be, but would you come? Would you come? And just come for the first time. And so that was how the invitation took place. There was not a clear set of expectations. And we didn't really know what our path forward was going to look like. But I think that was really important to have that ability to just say, I dream of doing something that involves community engagement, but I don't clearly know what it looks like. So for those of you who are stepping into this pond, I want you to know it doesn't have to be a clear path. So for 20 years, I've been part of the Community Advisory Council for the High Plains Research Network, which is a network of primary care practices and hospitals in the Eastern Colorado 16 counties. Our goal is to improve, to ask and answer questions around primary care and daily health in our communities, to recognize where there are kind of negative data points, but also to recognize our assets and our strengths, and then to build on our strengths and to start to impact our weaknesses. Our Community Advisory Council has been about 12 people over the last 2 decades. We've been on it for a long time, and there's a lot of lessons there. As I said before, we didn't really have a clear goal at the beginning other than to start to insert the patient and community voice into the work that was happening in our region, and to start to influence the research work so that it was locally relevant and would then hopefully have a better sort of uptake and results, which it has over our 2 decades in lots and lots of different projects. We have changed over the years. We do a lot of different things. And sometimes we sit and we listen and we advise. Yes, that's a good idea. No, that's not the way to go through. And sometimes we roll up our sleeves and we get in and we get really grimy and dirty and we learn hard things and we ask hard questions and we spend a lot of time kind of doing this and really thinking things through in alignment and in partnership with our research partners. And so it can be really messy in the middle in order to come up with something in the end. We also participate as idea generators. We are sometimes the leaders of the learning circles. We are authors on papers and part of the dissemination process. Oftentimes, a member or two will participate as a co-PI or a PI on a grant. We attend conferences and give presentations. And so we're right in the middle. Sometimes it's the methods and the process comes from the community members who don't have a formal education in this, but oftentimes have an idea about, what if we did X or Y? And so there's lots of different ways that we've been involved over the years. It's not always all of those things, and not everyone is always involved in all of those things. And I think that's really important, and we can talk about that later, that some people really thrive in certain aspects. I'm happy to be a public speaker like today, and others don't want anything to do with it. Ergo, they're not here. But they have strengths that I don't. And so they're the writers of newspaper articles, and they're the movers and shakers and the mavens and the communicators in the community. And so those strengths are valued, and those strengths are incredibly important. I want to just say a couple more things. I've talked about fluidity of role. We are geographically focused. That is our community, Eastern Colorado, very dispersed population, agriculturally based, and oftentimes have, if you look at the data points for the state of Colorado, we're often at the bottom, but we don't necessarily always see it that way. We also see our assets and we see our strengths and try to build on that. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and then we're going to go through lots of other questions.
All right. Thank you, Marette. Charlene, you have the virtual floor.
Well, I'm so glad that you asked Merritt to go first, because she did a fabulous job in talking about advisors and the continuum of where advisors can be, right? So I'm born and raised in Denver. I share that with people whether I'm being asked to be on a panel or help convene a panel or identify folks. And part of that is because born and raised in Denver, I work throughout Colorado and have worked nationally. So I've had the opportunity to work on a continuum, literally, with folks. And so I know today we're going to talk about advisors and advisory roles, but I'd also like to plant a seed about co-creation and what that looks like as we move forward. When I first started working, or actually was asked to come to the table, I'm going to date myself, but I'm going to do it anyway. It was in the AIDS epidemic, right? And I was very young, community and working in community, and I was asked to be on an advisory panel, be an advisor. This was many years ago in a clinical setting. And I did agree because I wanted to see what it was about, but really I learned very quickly that I wasn't the one. And so I helped the group, the clinical group, move and bring folks who were actually, I was impacted by HIV, but not infected. So I was able to lend that ear and step aside. And I think that's one of my points today, is that when we talk about advisors, there is a role, but sometimes advisors do need to step aside. And there are what I call the usual suspects that get called on all the time. And then bringing in new blood, new thinking, and I call them the unusual suspects. So just planting that seed. And then the type of work I've done, I started to work in what we call now community-based participatory research and community engagement. They didn't call it back then that, but it really has the movement, and really having communities move forward has really started to name some of the strategies and some of the processes so that folks who are new to the circle or wanting to improve and move forward have something definition. So I appreciate that. And so again, my world has been from a panelist, and more common now I help people, I help researchers, and I help community members look and identify processes. I will also share with you that there are a couple of questions when I get asked to be a part of any project, and I want to know who do they really want to work with, and if they're not at the table yet, why? Because they probably could do a better job than me in identifying folks. And I also share with them that if they're new to advisors, to really have an open perspective, and that's right, be flexible about what that looks like. And a friend of mine who was one of my mentors always said that if you only have a nail, or if you only have a hammer, everything's going to look like a nail. And so I will also say that with every advisory board, every role, no matter what, if it's traditional at this point, or even co-creating, that you're always going to have, every project's going to be different. Even with all of the decades of experience I've had, there's not one time that I step into a situation where it's exactly the same. And I love that, because it's growing, and it's that movement. So, and then my perspective around representation, that's a boy, that's a loaded question there. And I love that Sarah really talked about these cultural overlays. And one of the biggest parts that it's coming to light is, even more so than race and ethnicity and geographic, it's experience, right? It's lived experience, whether you have an academic background or a community background experience, there's no substitution for this lived experience, right? So we put that on the front burner as we're talking about, if folks who we're wanting to partner with in experience that's not there, then we have to go back to the drawing board, and that's okay. We have to have that experience and have that representation. That's true representation. So and you'll, and there will be experience, and you'll get cultural overlays if it's intentional. But one of the things I also hear is like, oh, we want to start this project and we really need buy-in. And I feel I've told, you don't even know how many researchers I've told, I am not a salesperson. I might sound like it sometimes, but I'm not. There is no buy-in in partnership, right? In any kind of partnership, in research, or even in your personal life. If you're partnering with somebody, Yeah, don't be a salesperson. So I'll stop there.
Adrian, can I just speak just for a second about usual and unusual suspects and representation?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Charlene, for reminding me. So I agree with your comment about there are the usual suspects and then there are the unusual suspects. And one of the methods we've used over the many years of recruiting people, sort of on a regular basis is, first of all, to ask who's not at the table, whose voice isn't here. But more importantly, we're not asking the usual suspects by and large. We're not asking the movers and the shakers in any one of our communities, but instead we kind of go under the radar and say, who do we know who's curious? Who do we know who asks interesting questions? Who do we know who might have this cool lived experience that the rest of us don't have. And so we work really hard at finding those unusual suspects. And one of the things that's worked really well for us, we're quite spread out, right? That's a long ways from northern eastern Colorado to southern eastern Colorado, and our meetings reflect that. And I'll talk about that when we have a chance. But we will oftentimes recruit a husband-wife team or a spousal team, right? A couple. Doesn't matter. And what's cool about that is now you're getting two people who get to talk about it on their road trip and at home. They get to spend the day together because our meetings often take all day because we can't meet on a regular basis. We meet off season agriculturally and off season with the school year, and oftentimes on a Saturday, and always in Eastern Colorado. So there's a lot of traveling. And so having a couple come has been a way for us to really get two voices for the price of one. And I don't mean that cost-wise. I just mean you get two voices. And originally we thought, if we recruit a couple, one will come of the couple, but in fact, they both come. And so we always get two people, and it makes it better for us as participants. And then the last thing I wanted to say is spouse teams. The representation piece is super important. And again, I can never speak for every female, middle-aged, white, cisgender, farm worker, ex-education person. I'll never be that voice. But I can speak from my experience, and I know what I live right here in my community and my ability to access things or not access things, and what I hear from my neighbors and my friends talking. And so I'm not expected to be that person, to be the expert in the lived experience of all, whatever people might think I represent. I am just expected to speak from my own lived experience. And once we got that figured out, holy cow, life got so much easier, I will tell you.
Thanks for sharing. That's really interesting. So are you thinking of the advisory board as it expanding into a dating service, or just kidding? Just kidding. All right, let's stay with you though with the first question. And
there has been a marriage, Adrian, so just
nice. That's what I'm talking about. All right, the added benefits of engaging your community. So I see that some folks are already sharing some thoughts in the chat. Please do so. If you have questions, please put those in the chat as well. After I ask our panelists a few questions, we'll have time for audience questions, and we will endeavor to get to as many as we can. So, Marette, let's start off with you. Can you describe what it's looked like to work and serve in an advisory board capacity versus being a full partner? What are some of the nuances involved in those different types of service and connection?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So there are times, so this advisory group was built for the long haul, and there's quite the diverse repertoire of work. And sometimes the kind of the research side of things needs to know if something resonates. Would a grant in topic X, Y, or Z resonate? Is that something we want to put energy into? Is our community going to respond to that? Are we going to go after this grant because their money's there? Or are we going to go after a grant because there is this resonance and relevancy? So I would say in that situation, that's an advisory role. That's sort of a yes, no. There are also times when partners, external partners may want to come in and say, I'm super interested in topic, whatever. And I would really love to work with the rural communities of Eastern Colorado. Can I kind of pitch my idea to you? And in that situation, we are also advisors. Like, does this resonate? Is it relevant? And do we get a sense of where you're inviting us into the partnership? Oh, I see. You already have your research question and your funding is mostly spent, and all you want to know is if we'll distribute your flyers. The answer is always a hard no, not interested. But, oh, you came to us early on. You're still sort of formulating idea and you're willing to talk to us and get our ideas around this research question. And you're willing to come back again and again and again and again and teach with us and work with us. Oh, this isn't an advisor question. Now you're talking about partnering with us. And what strengths do you bring and how can we help you with your work? That starts to move in from advisor into partnership. We developed early on by chance, I will tell you honestly, a process where a research question would come up. We would sit at the table and say, what are we going to do with that? And then we decided that in order to know what to do with that, we had to do a really deep learning process. So we go through a boot camp process, and the boot camp would lead to really in-depth questions and answers, and what more do we need to learn, and how much longer will it take us to learn this in order to be able to bring the knowledge of a medical component up to a level, but also the knowledge of the community of our research and medical partners down to the community, not down, but equal to the community level. So now they understood what we knew and how we talked about things and how we operated, but we now understood what they know, and what the science says and what's going on data-wise. And so that work, that learning process, that kind of that 101 education on both directions, bidirectionally, has been incredibly important for us. And from there, we're able to not only fine tune a research question together, but we will also then fine tune our methods and our processes and implementation together. And so that's where the partnership the piece really comes from. And I'm going to stop at that.
All right. How about you, Charlene?
So I'll talk a little bit about my role as a research staff person and working in community. So I think it does, you go back to, what that looks like, what building rapport and trust is so critically important, whether you're a community advisor or you're looking to build a community advisory board or community, a group of advisors. I stepped there on a board, and I can address that in a minute because I pulled back there, but or if you're looking at partnering, there are for sure several steps you need to include from the very beginning. And it is kind of that dating period. CCTSI has what they call a partnership development grant, and it is exactly that. It's a small pot of money bringing people together, and so that they can build trust. That would be a time where building trust and coming together would be a time where people should start talking about advisors, right, and partnerships and bringing people in. It's not a whole lot of money, but if you're going to bring advisors in, and you really have to think about not just people who are going to give you feedback, but what does that look like? An advisor can also be a partner, right? So looking at, and again, being intentional, but building rapport. And when folks put together, I've been part of projects where people will write a grant, and then in the grant they will say, we're going to put together an advisory group, and so on paper it looks great because there's all this representation. But what doesn't happen some of the time, and I'll say some of the time, is that input and those advisors weren't part of even the health topic or the health disparity. And so really, when people want to start working in any community, I tell people, you got to show up. And that's even before the grant, right? Show up in the community, learn about the community, talk to the community. What does that look like? What is that even health topic look like? That's an asset for folks when they show up. They get to also experience being in community and hearing it before they even write the grant. So I give those strategies, showing up, learning more about the communities that you want to serve, about advisors and partners. And because you can have beautiful grants and they do look really nice on paper. But then when you actually go out, it's not as easy to build rapport and to build trust and to make sure that you fill these roles that you said, because we don't want to tokenize, and that happens. And I will share with you that in racial and ethnic health research, that happens a lot. They will say, I know a Latina, we can choose. I got tokenized a lot very early on. And in doing so, rather than just bringing it to the table, but what are strategies to do that? What are strategies to not tokenize people, but to bring an authentic voice and an authentic process? So it goes back to all of that. So if you're a junior researcher and you want to, you're thinking about partnering or bringing on advisors and writing a grant, go to the community before you even start thinking about that. Learn about what that looks like, learn about the values, learn about what's important to them, because your research topic may not be at their priority, but if they see you and you're consistent and you're respectful, when you decide to do some of that work, they'll show up on the other end. Community shows up in a whole different way, in my experience, than research some of the time, because researchers are looking at this from their career point of view. This is a way of life for us in community. So it is different.
I think that's a great segue, because my next question is, and Charlene, I want you to pick this up. Can you give a brief example of a project where you felt like independent researchers who wanted to connect with you or your advisory board were aligned with the values and what was going on in the community, and conversely, an example when that didn't happen?
So I'll give you an example. Sometimes when people show up and they look really eager to work with you, you go, whoa, wait a minute, what do you want? And there was a researcher who just showed up, and the community was saying, why do they keep showing up? And they asked the question, but they didn't ask the question, right? And so this person kept showing up. He brought his family to events. And then he did share what he did for a living. And so people were a little leery, but they showed up. I mean, he showed up, and then he shared about what he was doing. He didn't ask for anything. First of all, he didn't ask for anything. He just showed up, and he experienced the culture. About a year and a half later, he came. Well, he stayed engaged, and didn't attend everything, but he was visible in the community. And we then knew his family. And by the way, we really liked his family, and his wife was amazing. But he come back, and he was sharing that he worked in research. He wanted to possibly engage the community. What should he do? And folks were like, absolutely. I might not be the one, but my cousin or my husband or my tia or other, they've experienced that. And so let's talk about it. And it was slow, it happened slowly, but again, that he developed rapport and trust in a whole different way, and not in an academic setting. And so he did, and he didn't have a hard time asking folks to be a part of it. What he did have a hard time in the academic world, convincing them that an authentic advisory group is what they needed on the bigger team. So, for folks who show up and intentions are good, and I do believe that that's where people come from, there's a balancing, there's a balance and a balancing part of this for researchers that we don't talk about. We do talk about building trust and rapport in community, but when folks are really engaged and they really do want to have authentic engagement and go back to their place of work and are so on fire, sometimes they have resistance. So this doc really appreciated being let in, so to speak, not by him, let in. And then going back to his own organization and not having that same kind of commitment, that was something they had to deal with. And I do hear that from researchers. They get this awakening, or something changes in their world, and they get that this is a partnership and not just a grant, and they get a little bit of pushback.
And what about an example when that didn't work out so well?
Oh, we'll be here all day for that. But
Well,
let
you
me
can just give us one.
let me just give you one. So currently there's a project that's happening, and it's a two-parter, right? The first part, the funding ended, and so they did really well in the grant, and they've come back to community and want to put together an advisory group. And what the project didn't do well was close out the first advisory group, bring in maybe some of them to be a part of the second part of the advisory group. And so, have this mix. And now they have a whole new advisory group and don't have rapport and trust. And so there's a continuum. And again, even if we look at it as a traditional advisor, there's still that trust and rapport that has to be built. And there's this educational piece. I think Merritt talked about that you have to give community some kind of background, even of the medical topic, so that they can authentically give you feedback. They do have their experience, but there are pieces that they can, there's this educational piece, and that is reciprocity. That is part of reciprocity. So that group is struggling a little bit, and hopefully some of them are on today listening to this. So it'll work out. I'm sure it's going to work out, but it's going to take a little bit of time.
Okay. Mara, unless you wanted to talk about that, I had another question for you, because our moderated time is limited. Okay, so let's talk about power dynamics, and I'm going to actually weave in a question we've gotten in the Q&A. And obviously, this is somebody who's served with me, but how do you deal with egomaniacs when you have people on the board? So how do you deal with egos? They didn't put it that way, but I'm embellishing. But how do you deal with egos? What are the power dynamics that may come up between the community, the people on the project? Like, any experience in managing those things? And advice you can give?
Forming my thoughts, Adrian.
Okay.
So we have a pretty intentional process that we use very regularly, if not at every single meeting, which is, and especially if there's a guest, perhaps it's a new, unusual suspect that's coming in. Perhaps it's a new research topic that we're kind of thinking about. And so there might be new research partners there at the table, or curious folks who are just coming. We will have this conversation about, listen, we sit in a round circle. Everybody gets equal voice. And at this table, we don't have titles. It's not that we don't care, but we're not giving titles. We're not putting Dr. So-and-so with a gabillion, licensures behind you. I'm Merritt, and you're Adrian, and you're Charlene, and we all come with a lot of expertise. So that's one. We talk about that. We say that. We're sitting in a circle. Our first name only is on our name tag. Among us, there will be crock pots and microwaves. Have you heard this little analogy? Some of us are going to be able to say, I have an idea. I have a question. Da, 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 da. They're the microwaves. They're the popcorn. And others are going to be the crock pots who are, and please envision some of my burly agricultural neighbors who sit back like this with their legs crossed and their arms over their chest and a scowl on their face, like, I'm not sure you've convinced me that you are worthy of my thoughts today. And it might take them all 6 hours before they get a chance, before they choose to speak. But we acknowledge that. Hey, crockpots, we're going to call on you at some point in time today. And hey, microwaves, we might say, write it on a sticky note, put it over here in the parking lot for a few minutes, or let's wait until we have a different moment where you can step in and ask more of these questions. So so what I'm giving you examples of is just this open dialogue of here's how we're going to operate as a group. And among us, there's a million personalities, and we value everybody, and we want to hear everybody, and we're listening to everybody. And we're going to give everybody an opportunity. So that's kind of trying to create this equitable environment for the egomaniacs to understand that you'll get your chance, right? We will hear you, but so will our quiet people get a chance. Is that good enough, Adrian?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Charlene, do you have any perspective on this?
Yeah, I'm going to give it to you in a cultural overlay. So in some communities, if there are elders around the table, we give them the floor until they're done. And that could be interpreted as ego because they have the floor. There are also high cultural contexts and low cultural contexts in the way that people engage in communities, right? And so from a research perspective, we have a timeline for the day, right? If you're at a meeting, we're meeting from 1 to 3. We have to answer these 2 questions. And we have this amount of time and we need to hear from everybody. So those are important cultural overlays to remember, especially if you're thinking about health disparities and people have experience in that. They're going to tell you the story, and they're going to probably tell it from a holistic point of view. And so time means different things to different people, and it is a consideration that we need to think about. And so I've heard people might think that that's coming from an ego perspective, but it is the way we are in community.
Great.
And Adrian, if I can add one more little tidbit about this. This started very early for us, and this is another thing that we kind of remind ourselves of on a regular basis. Early on, we were struggling, like, do we need a memorandum of understanding? Do we need bylaws? Do we need sort of our rules of conduct? And the community was pretty reticent about this, like, well, we don't even really know what we're doing, so why do we need those things? But we struggled and we struggled and we tried. We really tried. It felt like perhaps the right thing to do from one perspective, but maybe not the other, until this gentleman pushed back from the chair and stood up and he said, I'll tell you one thing. As long as this work is improving the health of these communities, and that this isn't just about you coming in from the outside to us, putting a feather in your cap, I'll be here. But the moment that shifts, I'm gone. And so I feel like that addresses your question, Adrian. So that, again, that's another sort of kind of our cultural rule that we remind ourselves of pretty regularly, that this is not about feathers in someone else's cap. This is about improving the health and the knowledge in our communities. And as long as we understand that and our partners understand that, then we can move forward pretty easily. And I think that addresses that idea of someone who may come in with too much ego.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. We do have a question that someone submitted when they RSVP'd. So lesson learned for all y'all that are watching: when you submit a question, when you RSVP, we're definitely going to get to it. So, and this is for either one of you, or both. Can you talk about making that decision of creating an advisory board when maybe there is an existing panel or group that you could utilize instead of creating that advisory board? So a sub question to that is, how do you know when there's an established footprint, and where do you go to figure it out?
Charlene, I have an answer, but I'll let you go first.
Oh, you go first. You're good.
So the way we handle that is there is this well-established advisory council. And there are times when kind of a new project will take off, and we try to identify a couple people from the existing council. And then we look out into the community and we try to bring in people who have perhaps more lived experience with whatever the research topic is at the time. So for example, diabetes. And so we've done a couple different projects around diabetes. And so each time those projects come our way, we say to our existing council, are there a couple who would like to participate in this project around diabetes? But we are intentionally going to go look for a handful of new members to participate. We're spreading the wealth. We're looking for more unusual suspects. We're also trying to kind of get our fingers farther out into the community and bring new people back into the sort of the core group. And so it's wonderfully bi-directional, but it's a way for us to not rely so heavily on one group of people, but to continually kind of use that strength and that foundation and spread out in order to continue the work, but not overburden folks. That's one idea, one way.
Charlene?
Yeah, so I'll give an example. This actually happened in Colorado. There was an existing, or there is an existing advisory group, and they were the go-to for many people. And because they were the only, some of the community felt like they were a barrier. Like, you know, if you didn't go through them, they were, your research wasn't, well, they were just the gatekeeper, and in a negative way, actually. So another group was started, and there was some division in the community. They've worked itself out. There are more than one advisory groups now. But really, when you continue and not use the wealth, and I love that, Merritt, that you said, you know, you use part of this and you go out. When you don't use that wealth and do, you know, have that breath, you can have people who will stay stuck and only go to the same group for every single topic in every single population or every single town or area. And it can hurt and divide community. I also believe the community has the power to decide what they want to do, and they did. They stood up and they decided that you know, they were not going to be divided, and it was good. The academic folks heard them.
Now, Charlene, I think you may, in your just previous answers, you may have answered this next question, but I'm going to read it anyway. The question is, from my experience, many of the community partners I've engaged with when it comes to research express how they often feel like researchers come, collect data, and then fail to follow up, exacerbating the transactional relationship versus a true partnership. Can you provide ideas on how the research team can close that barrier and improve trust from the community?
I'm sure Merritt has a million ideas on how to do that. I will use based on, and again, my role at the university and what community has said loud and clear. And we need to continue to hear them. The data that's collected of any community should, and if it's a true partnership, the data belongs to the community. What that looks like, how it's delivered back, how it's interpreted, that is one way to easily give back to the community and show true, authentic partnership.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would just add that this is about setting expectations. There are projects that are only going to last a short period of time. And thank you for asking community and patients to be part of the project during that short period of time. But if that's the case, then that should be explicitly discussed. This is X number of months. We have X number of dollars. We have a goal. I have asked for your assistance, and together we're going to go through all the different steps of this project. And by saying that at the beginning, we know what the end is. And the end, you know, we all know, you all know that the end's never really the end, because money may dry up and the data may be all collected, but then there's ongoing analysis and paper writing and dissemination and articles. And what does the community say about dissemination? A manuscript is great, but not all there is. And so how do we share that back with the community? And so what are those ways to sort of wind something down that's respecting the expectations of everybody that you walked in with? And so one of the slides that Sarah showed was, in this partnership, one of the key things is flexibility. Perhaps I came in thinking that we're going to do A, B, C, and D and we're done. But in fact, the community said, well, but what about 3 other really great ideas? And why can't that be negotiated and somehow respectfully and reciprocally, handled?
All right, another question we have, and this is a term I don't know, so I hope you understand what it is. How to overcome academic IRB requirements in communication efforts. Anyone want to take that one? First of all, could you tell us what IRB stands for?
Institutional review boards.
Okay.
So, Dawn, I would encourage you to step in here, but there are ways, and your CCTSI team will help you navigate that. So in particular in Colorado, the IRB board is used to having community and patient partners and has worked hard with lots of coaching and efforts on a huge team of people's part to start to help reduce the barriers. I'm going to leave it at that. There's a ton of research out there, or not research, but there's information out there, and in this crew is are your experts on that, but know that there are lessons.
Sarah, did you want to weigh in on this question?
I think Merritt covered the most important piece. There are resources here at the university and within COMERB to help navigate that. But on the whole, I would say, like, there are ways to involve community in all the pieces of data collection and analysis. There are ways to structure your study to ensure that you can collect and analyze data in a way that meets everyone's needs. So explore that, pay attention to it early, seek out those resources, get help designing and approaching that so that you've got a good equitable approach to all of those research equity pieces of your work.
All right, one more question and then we'll close it out. Are there any ways that you are working with communities to diversify research teams? In my experience, research teams aren't representative of the communities they intend to serve. Either one of you want to take
Charlene, I'm going to let you take that one.
Yeah, so that was actually going to be my takeaway. So whoever asked that question, thank you very much. That is a takeaway for me when I look both either in community as a panelist or asked, to participate, or as a research staff member. What does that look like? So I would ask everybody to do an inventory of who they have on staff. What does that look like? What topic are you looking at, especially when health equity is included in your name, in your institution name, or in your project? That is, there's no mincing there for folks in community, especially who experience health equity or health disparities at record amounts. So I'll first say that, and I'll stand there. But really looking at your team. And if you have a team, a research team and partners that couldn't adequately represent health disparity in marginalized communities, bring folks on, train them. If they don't have training, don't tokenize them, bring them on, but making sure that they have the assets and the training and the capacity building opportunities to shape and become a meaningful partner and staff member in all of those roles. I have been saying that for over 30 years, and partly because I would look at teams, and well-intended, but honestly, when I sit at a table and I'm the only, but they're wanting to work in my community, or I've been tokenized to sit in for a community, I will stop. I'll stop and ask the questions. Diversity and inclusion is important, but it's not as important as capacity building and making sure that people have what they need to be a meaningful research partner and staff.
All right, Merit Felzine, Charlene Barrientos Ortiz, thank you so much for being panelists today. That concludes our discussion. So just want to say a few things before we close out. This has been recorded and this will be released and we'll be able to share it with your colleagues who could not make it today. There also will provide the PowerPoint presentation and the slide deck. So there are resources on a slide that you can share along with the website, along with this recording. Please take the survey that we put in the link. We'll send it out electronically. And also the next CE forum will be January 24th, 2024. So we hope you will join us for that. Thank you so much for a robust discussion, for great questions. And we'll turn it over to Sarah if we need anything else. Otherwise, I think that closes us out. Is that right, Sarah?
That closes us out. The only thing I have to say is thank you, Adrienne, for moderating so well today. And thank you, Merit and Charlene, for being here to share all your wonderful experience.
All right, peace.
Thank you, everyone.